So what I was saying is, in this module, we will basically discuss on how to create and manage your user accounts in your database. Okay, how to authenticate them and how to assign default storage for them. Right, that is your table spaces. Then how to grant and revoke privileges. Privileges are set of permissions that you will be giving for that user. Okay, and create and manage. Roles are again a common set of privileges, right? Instead of assigning each privilege at a time, you can group them together as a role and you can assign roles to the users. Then create and manage profiles. The profiles basically are like you can describe the characteristics of a user using profiles, like how long he can stay connected to the database, how much of work can he do in a single session, or how many sessions can he connect, right? So such kind of restrictions or policies can be implemented using profiles. Okay. Right. So before we actually discuss, there are a few terms that you need to be familiarized with. Like, for example, what is a database user account, right? So a database user account is a means to organize the ownership of and the access of database objects, right? So your objects basically hold your data, right? Say, for example, a table, a view, right? Then you have other objects like functions, packages, and so on. So these basically contain the data, and you can organize the ownership of and access of these database objects through the use of database user accounts. Then a password is an authentication which is run by the Oracle database. Then a privilege is a right to execute a particular type of SQL statement or to access another user's object. Right? So that means a privilege is basically a permission, right, to access other users' data. So a privilege is a right to execute a particular SQL statement or to access another user's object, right? So it is a permission basically you'll be giving to that user. Since you are a DBA, you have the right to give that permission. Okay. Then a role is a named group of relative privileges that are granted to user or to other roles. So as I said, you can group all the privileges that you want to and then call that group as a role. Okay. Then profiles impose a named set of resource limits on database usage and instance resources. So as I said, how that user can use the data or the instance resources. Instance resources means memory parameters, right? Next is quota. Now quota is a space allowance given in a table space. So this way, this is one of the way by which you can control the resource usage by user. That means when you assign a user to a particular table space, the user is he can create his objects or store his data in that particular storage space. That is a table space. So it is not necessary that once you assign a user to a table space, he can completely take up the entire space in that table space, right? So you can define a limit on how much of space he can use. So that limit is your quota. Okay. Yep. Right. So now we'll discuss about the first concept, that is your database user accounts. So each database user account has a unique username, right? So a unique username, an authentication method, a default table space, a temporary table space, a user profile, a consumer group, and a log status, right? So these are the properties of a database user account, right? So you need to have a unique username. That means you cannot have two two accounts with the same username, right? And a username cannot exceed 30 bytes. So it cannot contain any special characters and must start with the alphabet. Okay. Then an authentication method. So each username should have a method of authentication. I mean user account, either a password or say there are other type of authentication methods like a biometric scan or your certificate authentication or token authentication and so on. But it must and should have one authentication method. Okay. Then a default table space. So this is the place where the user creates objects if he or she does not specify some other table space. So if you do not assign a table space for a user, right, when you are creating that, so a default table space will be assigned. That is system generated table space. Okay. Note that having a default table space does not imply that the user has the privilege to create objects in that table space. Nor does the user have a quota of space within the table space in which to create objects. Both have to be granted separately. So just because the user is assigned some table space, it doesn't give him the access to create objects there. Again, you have to give that privilege separately. Okay. Then a temporary table space. Now this is a place where the user can create temporary objects such as shorts or temporary tables. So generally, when you're working, when your SQLs are huge enough, they perform huge sort operations and so on. They require some temporary space where they can store data for temporary and work on them, right? So that is provided from your temporary table space. So again, there is one default temporary table space for your entire database. If you do not specify a particular an exclusive temporary table space for your user, this default which is assigned to the database will be assigned to the user as well. Okay. Then a user profile. Now again, it's the same as profile what we discussed. This is a set of resources and password restrictions assigned to each user. A consumer group, so you can group common users or group users with similar functionalities in your database. You can group them together, and then you can control the entire group. Instead of accessing each user at a time, you can just monitor the entire group to see how the users are doing. Then a lock status. So usually it has a user account has two status. Okay, two lock status. That is locked or unlocked. Generally, if it is in unlocked, only then the user can access that particular account. Okay. Right. So there are two predefined system accounts in your database. That is sys and system. We've already seen two table spaces also, right? System and sysops. So those two table spaces belong to these two accounts, right? So sys is granted the DBA role. So there's a role in your database called database administrator, which has all the administrative privileges and access required to perform administrative tasks. So this sys account is granted that role by default. It has all the privileges with admin option. Now what with the term with admin option here means that not only sys possesses the powers of DBA, but also can grant the same to any other user. With admin option means that he can grant that same privilege to others also. And it is required to start up, shut down, and perform some maintenance commands. It owns the data dictionary. A data dictionary is the data about the database, right? Not the actual user data, but data about the database, like how many table spaces are there, how many users are there, like how many data files are there in your database, like that. Then it owns the automatic workload repository. Now, data dictionary is on the more physical structure of your database, whereas automatic workload repository has more information in the instance of your database, that is SCH, like how much of memory allocation is happening, what are the currently top running SQLs, what are their execution times, how many times have been executed, all such kind of information is in your automatic workload repository. Then the system is granted the DBA role also. And these accounts are not used for your routine operations, right? These are not used for your any user operations. They are for your administrative purpose. The system, sys and system accounts have the database administrator role granted to them by default. To connect to your sys account, you should always use the as sys DBA clause. So that is why whenever we log in as sys, you have to system account is granted DBA role by default, but not the sys DBA privileges, right? Then sys and system accounts cannot be dropped. So you cannot drop these two user accounts. They are very much required for your database to function normally. Next, we'll see about creating a user, right? So in order to create a user, you can use your enterprise manager. So once you log into your enterprise manager, you have the schema, server tab. Under server, you have a column called security. Under that, you have a link called users. If you click on that, you get a page which displays all the current users in your database, right? On the right hand side, you have a create button. Once you click that, you get this page, create users. Okay. So you have the a lot of information need to be entered, like basically what we discussed till now, like name for that user, right? It has to be unique. Then a profile which you can set. Now there are two default profiles which we'll be discussing later on. Then authentication method, so the different types of authentications you can do. Then enter the password and confirm it again. Then you have another option called expire password now. What it means is, as a DBA, you would be providing the password for that user, right? So that gives you an advantage. So you can log into that user account anytime because you know both the username as well as the password, right? So to give user an option of changing his password, you have this expire password now option. What happens is, when you create this user, you will share the username and password with that particular user to log into. Now once that user logs in the very first time into the database, the password what you have provided here will expire. Okay, it will be no longer valid, and immediately database will prompt that user to enter a new password. So he can change his password that, even before he logs in, right? So very first time he can change his password and log in, and then start our working in the database. Okay, so that is the expire password now option. Then assign a default table space. So whatever table space you will be assigning as default, that will be assigned to that user. If you do not mention anything here, the default table space for your entire database will be assigned for that user. Same goes with the temporary table space as well. Then you have the status called locked and unlocked, right? So generally you have to keep it in unlocked state for the user to log into the database. If the account is locked, the user cannot log in. Even though he provides the correct username and password, he cannot log in. Then you have remaining tabs. Next to general, you have roles, system privilege, object privilege, quotas, and so on. So we'll discuss about each and them later on in the chapter. Right. This is what we discussed.
Sorry, one thing, Raghu. What is the service name for starting the enterprise manager?
The URL, you remember?
No, I have the URL. What is the service name?
Okay. Service name is Oracle DB Console. It will probably be the very first in your services list.
Okay.
Oracle DB Console followed by the SID.
Right.
Right? Okay.
For some reason, my when I start the Oracle thing, it just it says your connection is not private. I think
Have you
opened the
started as an administrator? Log into your system as an administrator and try.
Yeah, I think my browser setting was in.
You get a security warning. Usually, you have to accept the certificate and then proceed. Are you using Google Chrome or Mozilla Firefox?
Google Chrome.
Chrome. Okay, then you have to go to that proceed to unsafe link. You'll have that small link. Once you enter the URL, it will say this page is unsafe, and you get a small link in the left hand side bottom. Just click on that.
It doesn't give me that option. It says your connection is not private.
Working now?
Yeah, I think I got it. Yeah. No, okay. Continue.
Right. So as I said, you can create users through Enterprise Manager also, right? So first is authentication, right? You have different authentication methods here. Basically, you have three options. One is pro password, external, and global. We'll discuss what each of these means. So basically, authentication means verifying the identity of someone, a user, a device, or an entity who wants to use data and resource or applications. So basically, even when you connect to your database through an application, there is an authentication method, right? Even the application has to authenticate itself before accessing data in your database. To validate the identity establishes a trust relationship for further interaction. Authentication also enables accountability by making it possible to link access and actions of the specific identity. So you can audit basically, right, what that particular user has done in your database, what kind of actions he has performed. Then after authentication, authorization process allows access or limit the level of access and actions permitted to that entity. So authentication just gives you the access to that. Authorization gives you the limit of access in that database, right? So when you create a user, you must decide on the authentication technique to use, which can be modified later on. So the first method is password. This is also referred to as authentication by the Oracle database. So create each user with an associated password that must be supplied when the user attempts to establish a connection. So when setting up a password, you can expire the password immediately, which forces the user to change the password after first login. If you decide on expire using user password, make sure that the user has the ability to change the password, because some applications do not have this functionality, right? Passwords are always automatically and transparently encrypted during network connections. So by using a modified data encryption standard algorithm before sending them across the network. Generally, some applications may not have the feature to recognize that their password has expired immediately and you're supposed to enter a new password. So you have to be careful when you're using that particular feature, right? Now, the next type of authentication method is external. Now, this is referred to as authorization done by the operating system. Now, previously what we saw, that was authentication done by the database. This is authentication done by the operating system. Now, users can connect to the Oracle database without specifying a username and password. With external authentication, your database relies on the underlying operating system or the network authentication service to restrict access to database accounts. So if you set this particular parameter OS authentication prefix and use the prefix, whatever value you are setting to this parameter, you have to use that in your operating system login name, okay, to for your database to recognize that the user who is logged into your system is a genuine user and has also access to the database. Right now, this prefix is for backward compatibility. Okay. Now, for example, you set the parameter called OS authentication underscore prefix is equal to OPS dollar. Then, if you log into your operating system as TS Smith, then from now on, once you set this parameter for your database, you have to log in as OPS dollar TS Smith. Then database will automatically recognize that this TS Smith is a admin or a genuine user of your database. Okay. Then now that was for backward compatibility. Now the user has just to be a part of the group that installed the database. Okay. So if you are the same user logging into the operating system, you will get the access to the database directly. Okay. Next is global. So using the advanced security options, global authentication, which is also called as strong authentication, allows user to be identified through the use of biometrics, X509 certificate, token device, and Oracle Internet Directory. So these are advanced features, right? Like you have this fingerprint scanning or iris scanning and so on, through which you can log into the system and thereby again gain access to the database. Okay. Right. So far we saw how to provide password for or administration authentication to the normal user. Now we'll see administrator's authentication. So at operating system security, a DBA must have the OS privileges to create and delete files. Because when you create a user, you need to assign user to a table space. And when you're creating a table space, you need to assign data files. So data files are actually created when you create a table space, right? So those data files are physical files that are created in the operating system. So that is why you need to have OS privileges to create and delete files. And typically, a normal database user should not have the OS privileges to create and delete the files, right? Then, about security, sysdba and sysoperator connections are authorized by a password file, that is password authentication, or OS, that is external authentication. So password file authentication records the DBA user by name, whereas OS authentication does not record the specific user. And OS authentication takes precedence over password file authentication for sysdba and sysoperator. Okay. Right. So as we discussed, in Linux and Unix, by default, DBA belongs to the OInstall group, which has required privileges to create and delete database files. Whereas in Windows, you have to be part of administrator group. Then, for administrator security, sysdba and sysoperator connections are authorized only after verification with the password file or with the operating system privileges and permissions. If the operating system authentication is used, then the database does not use the supplied username and password. Operating system authentication is used if there is no password file or if the supplied username and password is not in that file, or if no username or password are supplied. In these three cases, authentication by operating system is performed. Okay, that is the username you provide is not in that password file, or if you do not provide a username and password, or if it is the username, and if the database itself has no password file. Okay. Right. However, if authentication succeeds by the means of password file, the connection is logged in with the username. Right. So generally, when you give a password, password authentication is there, you have to give a username and password. Right. Whereas for operating system, you can even log in without providing a username and password. So that is why external authentication does not record the username. If authentication succeeds by the means of operating system, then it is a connect/connection that does not register the user. Okay. So after you created a user, you can even unlock them during the creation, or you can unlock the default accounts that are already present in your system. Remember, when we created the database, in the last page you get the password authentication, right, where you need to unlock the accounts. If you do not unlock them there, you can unlock it through here also. Click on the username, you get the information about the user, and you can check the status whether it is in locked or unlocked. If it is in locked state, the right hand side you have actions feed. You can drop down the menu and select the option unlock user and click on go. This will unlock this particular user. Okay. Right. So that's what we discussed. Okay.
Sorry, go on.
Next is here.
I'm also trying to do this thing on the enterprise manager, so that's why I'm not responding probably. But keep on going. I'm listening to you.
Okay. Next is your privileges. Right. There are two types of user privileges: system and object. Okay. System level privileges enables user to perform a particular action in your database. That is basically let you change the structure of your database, like create a new table space or create a new a table, right, or data file or anything. That basically alter, let's say alter the structure of your database, or add new files to the database. That is basically system privilege. Whereas object privilege enables user to access and manipulate a specific object. Object level is basically to access somebody else's data, right? So if I have a table in my scheme user, and you want to access that, so I need to provide the access, or the administrator needs to provide that access. Now that is object level access, okay, or also known as object privilege, right?
Yep. Go on.
So there are two categories as we discussed. System privilege. Each system privilege allows the user to perform a particular database operation or a class of database operations. For example, create a table space is a system privilege. System privilege can be granted by administrator or by someone who explicitly given permission to administer privilege. There are more than 100 distinct system privileges available. Right. Next is your object privilege. Object privileges allow user to perform a particular action on a specific object, such as a table, view, sequence, procedure, package, or function. These are all your objects, right? So without specific permission, a user can access only their own objects. So without any other exclusive permissions, you can access your own objects. You cannot access anybody else's objects in the database. So object privilege can be granted by the owner of the object. So if you want to access my database, my object, like a table that I have created, I need to provide the access for you, or by the administrator. So an administrator can give you the access, or by someone who has explicitly given the permission to grant that object privilege or access to that object, right? So these are the system privileges that you have. You can select any of them, right? When you're creating the user, you can click on the system privilege tab. You get the list of privileges that are already there. So generally, you will have none. Click on edit list. On the left hand side you have the available system privileges. There are more than 100. You can actually read, go through the list and select the ones which you want, put them in your selected list and click OK, and they will be added to that particular user, right? Now there are some system privileges that you should not provide to a normal user, like restricted session. So when you are performing some maintenance activities in your database, you put your database in restricted mode, so that normal user cannot log into the database at that time. So any user who has a privilege of restricted session can log in your database in restricted mode also, right? Then privileges like sysdb and sysoperator should not be provided to a normal user, because with that privilege he can start up or shut down your database. right? Then drop any object. Now generally drop object means he can drop only his objects. Drop any objects, he can drop any object in a database from any user. Okay, now that's again quite dangerous. Then create, manage, drop and alter table space. So these kinds of privileges should not be provided, right? So you can drop an entire table space as well. Then create any directory. So by using this privilege, you can map an operating system directory to your database through which data can be moved out of your database, right? So again, for security reasons, this privilege should not be provided. Then grant any object privilege. So again, using this system privilege, you can grant any object privilege to any object that you want, right? So you can give access to anybody, any user who is not supposed to have access to, right? So again, you should not give such kind of privileges to a normal user. Then alter database and alter system privileges also should not be given. So you have to be very careful when you're selecting the system privilege from the list. Okay. Then next are your object privileges. So to grant your object privilege, you need to perform this task. That is, choose the object type first, then select the object, and then select the object privilege. Right. So once you are in the object privilege tab, first you need to select what kind of object that you want to give access to. There are various objects in your database, right? Like functions, procedures, packages, tables, views, and so on. So first you need to select the object type. Say for example, we'll select a table, right? Then select the object. That means in which schema is that which user that object belongs to. So enter the owner of that object, then the object name. Either if it is a table, enter the table name, right? Once you provide that detail, then you have a list of privileges available on the left hand side column. Can you see you have like alter? So these privileges change depending on the type of object that you select. You may not have index for a view, or say for index for a package, right? Index is only for a table or a view, right? So depending on the object, these privileges also keep changing. So out of these available privileges, you can select only the ones that you want, right, to the selected list, and then click OK. So for your user, or the user that you are creating, that particular privilege will be granted for that particular user to access the other user's data, whatever you specify here. Okay. Now,
okay. One quick question on the previous slide.
Okay.
That's all fine. And the object type, I see something called queue there.
Yes.
What is a queue type?
Queue is it's an object. It's created. When you're writing a lot of application code and all is going on, right? Generally, you will not create an object called queue. Okay. But what exactly is a queue? Okay, I'll tell you after the class.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah. So yeah, I just need to refer in a long time. I also forgot.
No worries. Okay.
Right. Next, you have revoking system privileges with admin option. Now, once you have given the admin option, right, each object has an admin option when you are trying to give that particular privilege. If you can see in system privilege here, let me just show you. Can you see admin option checkbox on the right hand side? For each system privilege that you have selected, you have an admin option, right?
Yes.
Checkbox. You can check that box, right? Now, what happens if you select that admin option? Now, say DBA, as a DBA, you have granted a particular system privilege called create table to Jeff, right? Now, since you have included with admin option in that, Jeff can also give the same permission to Emmy, right? So both can create tables now in their respective table spaces. Okay. Now, if you revoke that, say revoke that privilege for Jeff. So Jeff is no longer able to create a table, but Emmy can still continue. Okay. Even though Jeff was the one who gave her that privilege, Emmy can still continue working. Okay. Right.
Okay. So it's like uncontrolled access. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, so it has to be individually provided, right? So if you want to revoke that privilege, you have to go to that particular user and then revoke it. Okay?
Okay.
Right. Then same, you have object privilege also. Now, say Bob is the owner of a certain table and Bob has given access to Jeff to access his data. Now he has given it with admin option, right? Or here you say grant option basically. Now Jeff has given the same to Emmy, right? So Emmy can access Bob's data. Okay. Now what happens? Bob has revoked the same access to Jeff. Now Jeff loses access to Bob's data, and even Emmy will also lose access to Bob's data. Okay.
So this is done with grant options. Eh?
Yeah. Now this is for object privilege. Now previously what we saw was system privilege, right?
Okay.
System privilege does not have cascading effect, whereas object privilege has the cascading effect.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Next is your roles. Now what is role? Roles are basically used for easier privilege management. They are a group of system or object privileges, right? In a group together and called as a role. So it is basically used for easier privilege management, dynamic privilege management, and selective availability of privileges. What that means is you can use roles to simplify privilege management. Rather than granting the same set of privileges to several users, you can grant the privilege to a role and then grant that role to each user. Say for example you have 100 users in your database and each user requires minimum 10 set of privileges. So normally how many queries do you need to fire? 10 into 100, 1000 queries, right? So instead of that, you can create a role, right? Assign these 10 queries, 10 privileges to that role, and you just assign this role to each of the user. So you are reducing 1000 queries to 100 queries, right? Okay.
Yes.
Dynamic privilege management. So if the privileges associated with a role are modified, all the users who are granted the role acquire the modified privilege automatically and immediately. So you add a new privilege to that role. All the users who is assigned to that role will gain that access, that privilege immediately. Or if you remove one from that role, all the users who are assigned that role will lose that privilege immediately. Okay. Then selective availability of roles. So roles can be enabled and disabled to turn privileges on and off temporarily. Okay. So you can enable a role and disable a role. So you do not have to grant and revoke it each time. You can just enable and disable. That is selective availability also. Now here we have an example, 3 users, Jenny, David and Rachel, right? Jenny is a manager, David and Rachel are clerks. So since these two, David and Rachel are clerks, they can only select an employee information or update the employee information. Okay. But whereas Jenny is a manager, he can not only just select and update, but he can also delete and insert new employee information also, right? So there are 2 roles created now. One is HR manager and HR clerk. Now HR clerk has only 2 privileges called select employees and update employees. HR manager has delete employees and insert employees. Okay, exclusively assigned to that. But since he's a manager, he also has the power to select and update employees, right? So instead of again exclusively providing the same privileges to the HR manager role, you are simply assigning the HR clerk role to HR manager role. Okay, so thereby Jenny has power to perform all the 4 operations. Are you clear?
Yep.
So here you are not just assigning privileges to role, you are also assigning another role to a role. Correct? You are assigning HR clerk role to the role. So that is also possible. Okay. So privileges are granted to and revoked to role as though they were a user. Okay. Then roles can be managed to and revoked from users or other roles as though they were a system privilege. A role can consist of both system and object privilege. A role can be enabled or disabled for each user who is granted the role. A role can require a password also to be enabled, and roles are not owned by anyone. Okay, they are not part of any user or schema. Right, so that means they are not stored anywhere. They are logical units. Right. So in the example we saw the HR clerk role and HR manager role. Right. Apart from that, you have some predefined roles in your database, like connect role. That has only one system privilege called create session. Okay. And you have another role called as resource. Now this has many more privileges like create cluster, create index type, create operator and so on. Then you have another role called scheduler admin. that has few many other privileges, and you have a role called DBA. So most system privileges and several other roles are included for your DBA. So do not grant this to a non-administrator. So then you have select catalog role that displays all the roles that are there in your database. About 1,700 object privileges are there in the particular role. Okay.
Okay.
Then there are some functional roles for your advanced features of your database. Like if you want to integrate your database to an external application, you have some roles which will help you do that, right? Like QA administrator role provides privileges to administrators, advanced queuing system. HS admin role includes privileges needed to administer heterogeneous services that you connect your database. Okay. Right.
Yes.
So on the just like your users, in your server tab you have security column. First link is your users. Next below users you have roles. You can click on roles and see what all roles are there assigned to that particular user. Okay, you have to enter the username there, or click on create button to create new roles. Once you click on create, you get this existing roles, right? You have to enter a role name and so on. You can assign existing roles to this role, so you can select a few roles from here and assign that to your new role that you're creating, right? Or you can even select some of the system privileges and object privileges that are there, and then completely customize your role. Okay, right? Then you can even secure a role. That means you can provide a password for your role. So just like your user, once you create a role, you have the option of authenticating, right? You have the three options like password, external, global, right? So that means every time you're trying to assign a role to a user, it will prompt you for a password. Okay. Next, so that is about roles. Next is use profiles and users, right? How you assign each user is assigned one profile by default. So you have a profile called default in the database that has all the default values, right? Users are assigned only one profile at a given time. Profile control the resource consumption and manage account status and password expiration. So here on the slide you can see there is an example called now this is a password, sorry, this is a profile created limited underscore user, that is the profile name. Here these are the fields that that are there, I mean the parameters that are there for it, like CPU per session, CPU per call, connect time, idle time, and so on. And then you have concurrent sessions, read per session, read per call, private SGA, and composite limit, right? Now each of these parameter has a specific operation. Now we'll discuss what are those. So profile impose a named set of resource limitations on database usage and instance resource. A profile also manages the account status and place limitation on user's password like the length and expiration time and so on. Every user is assigned a profile and may belong to only one profile at a given time. If user is already logged in when you change their profile, the changes do not take effect until their next login. The default profile serves as the basis for all other profiles. So whatever new profile you're going to build, it is going to be built upon the default profile that is provided for your database. As illustrated in the slide, limitations on a profile can be implicitly specified as in CPU per session, be unlimited as CPU per call, or reference whatever setting is in the default profile. Profiles cannot impose the resource limitations or users unless the resource underscore limit initialization parameter is set to true in your parameter file. Okay. Right. So for profiles to enable the administrator to control the following system resources, you have first CPU resources, right? Now a CPU resource may be limited on per session or per call basis. A CPU per session limit of 1000 means that an individual session that uses this profile consumes more than 10 seconds of your CPU time, right? Because CPU time limitations are in hundreds of a second. That session receives an error and is automatically logged off. So the error message would be ORA 02392 exceeded session limit on CPU usage. You are being logged off, right? So in this earlier slide we saw CPU per session has been set to 1000, right? So that means that if that session takes more than 10 seconds of your CPU time, the session will be automatically locked off. Similarly, you have CPU per call parameter. Now, a per call limitation does the same thing, but instead of limiting the overall session, that is all the activities that are performed in that session, they are not pulled together. It prevents a single command from consuming too much of CPU time. So if CPU per call is limited and the user exceeds the limitation, the command aborts and the user gets an error message such as ORA 02393 exceeded call limit on the CPU usage. And the command, only that query will be terminated. The session will be intact, the user can still continue working. Right? And similarly, you have other parameters in respect to your network and memory. Right? So you have connect time, which indicates how many minutes a user can be connected before automatically being locked off. Or you have idle time, indicates how many minutes a user session can remain in idle before being automatically locked off. Then number of concurrent sessions can have created by using database user. SCA limits the amount of space consumed within the SCA for sorting, merging, and so on activities, right, for each user.
It's good. I don't think this can be done in SQL Server.
SQL, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
I'm a SQL DBA, so I don't know. Man. You can't do these kind of limitations unless you use Windows profiles.
Okay. Right. Well, here it is on your database side. It doesn't depend on your operating system. Right. Then you have limitations on disk I/O. This limits the amount of data a user can either at the per session or per call level read or write to your database. So you have reads per session or reads per call. Place a limitation on the number of reads for both memory and the disk. This can be done to ensure that no I/O sensitive statements overuse the memory or disk usage resources. Right? Then you can set a password also. You can implement password security features. Like, for example, automatic locking feature is there. Enables automatic locking of account for a set duration of user failed to log in into the system in the specified number of attempts. Right? So the parameter is failed login attempts. Specifies the number of failed login attempts before the account is being locked off. So you enter a wrong password too many times, your account gets locked. So this parameter sets that value, how many times that wrong password should be allowed. Okay. Then password lock time parameter specifies the number of days for which the account is locked after the specified password or number of failed login attempts happen. Right. So you can specify 1 day or 2 days. So then the user can log in next day again, then try. Okay. Generally, this happens with your mobile phone, right? You enter password wrong too many times, it will ask you to wait for some 30 seconds or something, correct?
Yep.
The same thing can be done with your database also. Then you have password aging and expiration, right? So password lifetime parameter determines the lifetime of the password in days, after which your password expires. So you need to enter a new password. And the grace time parameter specifies grace period after changing the password. After the first login successful after your password has expired. So it also has a grace time parameter also. But you shouldn't use expired password for your administrative accounts like SIS, SysMan and DBA something. Okay. Then password history is that. That means your parameter called password reuse time specifies a user cannot reuse a password for a given number of days. So you cannot use your old password again. You must and should enter new password. Then you have password reuse max specifies the number of password changes that are required before the current password be reused. So that means if you say reuse max as 3, you have to enter 3 new passwords before you can use the old password again. Right? So this is how the password looks like. You have expiring days, log and history, right? The number of days to keep the password, the complexity. You can provide your own user defined functions for your passwords, number of failed login attempts as well, right?
Okay.
And finally, you have quota. So assigning a quota to a user. A user who does not have an unlimited table space system privilege must be given a quota before they can create objects in a table space. Quotas can be a specific value in either megabytes or kilobytes or unlimited. Okay. So you have to specify a value or you can say unlimited. So for example, here users is the default table space assigned to that user which is created. So currently the quota is unlimited. That means you can use up the entire space, right? Or if you can specify a value in either kilobytes or megabytes. But if the user has this system privilege assigned to him, unlimited table space, then these limits are overwritten. I mean, they are no longer valid. If the user has unlimited system unlimited table space system privilege. Okay, so it will override
the system privilege will overtake object privilege.
Yes, it will not consider the quota parameter if the user has unlimited privilege.
Okay.
Right. And there is one more thing. When you grant a quota to a particular user, it does not guarantee that that amount of space is saved permanently for that user. Say for example, you have a table space of size 10 GB, okay, and you create a user and you assign this table space to that user, and you will specify quota as 5 GB, okay. So this 5 GB is the maximum amount of space he can use in that table space, but it does not guarantee that that 5 GB is always set aside for this user. Generally what happens, you will not assign only one user to a particular table space. You will usually group multiple users or similar users and grant them one single table space, okay. So you have to say, sorry?
I see the point, yeah, I understand it, yeah, got it.
Correct? Yeah. So when 10 users are assigned and each user has granted some space in that, so each user has a quota, so it is not confirmed that each user will be assigned that much of space. Now, say if there is a single user who doesn't have quota, so he can use the entire space. So once he starts using up the entire space, if available, the remaining users can use up to the limited quota, or else they can use how much ever is available from that under that quota limit. Okay. So if the other user uses more space and he's almost exhausted the table space, there is nothing the other users can do. But the other users, they cannot exhaust the table space. They can only use how much ever the quota is mentioned on that. Okay.
Okay, got it.
Right. And when does a quota, when does your Oracle instance use a quota? The, quotas are used when a user creates or extends a segment. So whenever he is creating new objects or is increasing the size of the existing objects, quota is used. Which activity do not count against quota? So activities that does not use space in the assigned table space do not affect quota, such as creating use or temporary tables. Then when is it replenished? Quota is replenished when the object owned by that user are dropped with either purge clause or the objects in your recycle bin which are automatically deleted, permanently removed from your database. Then that free space is again added back to that quota. Okay.
Okay.
Right. So just to summarize what we discussed, we saw how to create database user accounts, right? Assign, authenticate users and assign default storage areas. Then grant and revoke privileges, create and manage roles, then create and manage profiles, right? So as part of practice, we will create a profile to limit resource consumption, create a couple of roles called clerk and manager, then create 4 new users, 1 for manager and 2 for clerks. Okay. Log into your enterprise manager. I'll just quickly show you the steps how to do that. Okay, so you can practice later on.
Okay.
Are you able to log into your enterprise manager?
Yeah, I'm able to log in.
I don't have that option. Right. So under server, you have security. Can I see security here? In this column, you have users, roles, and profiles, right?
Yep.
Click on users. log in again. Right, so these are the users that are already there in my system, right? There are so many. Most of them are default, required for Oracle internal purpose, right? And some of them are user created, okay? Right. Now, if you want to create a new user, click on create button. Now, enter the username. Right. Profile, you have only, I have few profiles here. Default and monitoring profile are already there, provided by Oracle. The remaining is what I have created. Okay. For now, we'll select default. Authentication method, you have password, external, and global, the 3 types. Okay. Go for password, enter a password, right? After, then again, I am entering a password for Oracle. I will check box expire password now. Now, next is your default profile. Now, you can, if you know the, default table space. If you know the table space name, type it in here. If you do not know, click on the search button. Get a list of table spaces that are there in your system. Okay. So we've created a table space called Murugan already. So I'll select it. Right. Temporary table space. If you have exclusively created a temporary table space for this user, you can again search that list and assign that, or else leave that. The default temporary table space which is assigned to a database will be assigned for this user also. Okay, that is 10. If you can see the search column, search, find it here. It is 10. You can see this is assigned by default. Status, locked or unlocked. Then next tab you have, now click on show SQL. It will show you the SQL to create your statement, right? So you have create user Murugan, profile is default, identified by the password that you provided, password expire, default table space Murugan, account unlocked. Okay. Next is grant connect to Murugan. So because with grant only you can connect to your database. Without that grant privilege you cannot connect to the database. Next is role tab. Now currently, see, grant connect was mentioned in your SQL because connect tab is selected by default, right? Now if you want to add more, click on edit. Now, once you click on edit, you get the list of available roles in your database. Can you see there are so many roles, right? Each has its own specific set of operations that you can perform. Like DBA, you can perform all the database administrative operations. Then you have other roles, so many here, right? So we create a role later on and assign this to our user. Okay. Then next tab is your system privileges. Now currently there are none, okay, because the new user, no system privilege is being selected now, so no items found. So to add a new system privilege, click on. Here is a list of your system privileges. So there are so many, okay. So I've selected create table. Now Murugan, once you log in as Murugan, you can create the tables now because I've provided that system privilege for you. Okay. Now you have the checkbox called admin option. So you can also provide this particular privilege called system privilege to any other user. Okay. Then next tab you have your object privilege. Shall I carry on? Is a screen change?
Still have system privileges. It's going slow.
So I have selected create table out of the entire list. Now I'm in object privileges. Okay. Now under object privileges, first thing you have to do is on the right hand side, can you see select object type?
Yes.
Now first you need to select the object on which you are going to provide access to. So I will select table, okay, and then click on add.
Okay.
Now you are in the add table object privilege page, right? So first enter the table on which you need access on or Murugan needs access to, right? So click on search button, enter the username here. Okay, can you see schema? Schema and user are the same thing. Currently some OWBSS audit is selected, right? So select HR. HR has already a lot of data in it for our example purpose. And click on go. It will give you the list of tables available in HR. Can you see? Countries, departments, department ID, DMP, employees, so on. Select employees for our example and click select. Okay, check this box, select, and then click on select. Now, owner name dot table name have been entered in your select table object 3. Now, what kind of access do you want? Do you want to perform select operation? Yes. Do you want to alter the table or delete the table? You know, all that privileges are here. Generally, you should only stick with select. You know, since the new user is not owner of the table, you shouldn't provide alter, insert, delete unless it's absolutely required. Okay. So we have provided select as of now. Click OK. Right. So set object privilege select. The owner is HR. The object is employees. Right. Now again you have grant option. You can select grant option also. Next you have quotas. Now I have come to quotas tab. Now can you see default has been mentioned next to Murugan table space. Has the page changed for you?
Oh yes, go on.
Okay. So Murugan has default next to that, right? So you can select unlimited here. So the user can use the entire space in your table space here. Okay.
Yep.
Right. Or you can specify a value. If you say value, then again in this column you have to specify the value in limited KB or MB. Okay. Right. Then next tab is your consumer group. You can specify. If there are common group of users, you can specify them together here. Say there are multiple HR. Okay, there is some error. Yes, give me a minute. I manager went down for some. So, were you doing those steps simultaneously in your system?
No, not really. I was looking at this some time back, so that's fine. You keep going, I'll catch up.
Okay. Now, can you see the SQL query?
Yep.
You have selected multiple options, right? So you have the same create user, username, profile is default, and identified password, password expire, default table space is quota. Murugan, then quota is unlimited on Murugan, account unlocked. Then first is grant create table to Murugan, then grant select on HR.employees to Murugan, and finally grant create connect to Murugan. Right? So these are the SQL statements that are going to be fired by your enterprise manager. So click on OK. Now, for example, I will log into the user from my SQL class. Okay. Now, this has, I'll connect as user. Right. I'll enter the password. Okay, I see. I've got an error or a warning message. Basically, the password has expired. Changing the password from enter new password, right?
Yes.
So I have to enter new password. Now password has changed and I have logged in successfully, right?
Right.
Okay. I have to say select start from tab. Currently there is no data, right? There are no tables in my user. Okay. Now, but I have provided some object level privileges, right? Now I'll say select start from hr.employees. Even though the table belongs to other user, I can still access data, right?
Yeah. Should you always specify a schema name there?
Yes, if you are not the user, owner of that, you have to provide that name. From the same schema, I have entered another table name. Can you see the output?
Yep.
Right. So that is how you can control the access. Okay.
Okay, got it.